The next session will start leading into our workbook. So if you want to open your workbook, that's for day one, or the first day, go to module 1A, and you can start thinking about that while this next session speaks, which is on the foundations of Indigenous stewardship. Your module 1A actually goes over Indigenous stewardship, what are foundations, and so you might get some ideas for that, or you might develop some questions as you hear this next panel speak. So I am going to introduce the next panel, and you can all please come up here. So we're going to have Kathleen George, Russell Hepfer, and Bill Hand. So for Kathleen George, you did see her earlier. She served on the Tribal Council of the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde for the last 7 years. She also serves on the Spirit Mountain Gaming Incorporated Board of Directors and has served on a number of boards and committees. She also shared some very wise words with us this morning, so we thank her. Russell Hepfer is a Lower Elwha Clallam tribe member. He grew up in the Lower Elwha Clallam Reservation and has exercised his treaty harvest rights for his entire life, harvesting fish and shellfish, including geoduck. Bill Willard Hand has worked to protect and preserve the natural wonders of the Copper River region for over 30 years. And I am going to moderate this session as we talk about foundations of Indigenous stewardship. And thank you, everybody. Welcome. If you would like to introduce yourselves at all, any more than you already have, you're welcome. And I would be happy to hear your initial thoughts on how you think about Indigenous stewardship, what that means to you.
Well, thank you. I had mentioned earlier, I'm Bill Hand. I'm from the native village of Klutikaw in Copper Center, Alaska. It's a large section of Alaska that borders the Wrangell-St. Elias Mountains and has the Copper River running right through it. And you may have heard of Copper River red salmon over your lifetime. That's the heart of where that salmon used to run. I was born in the region and spent my entire life in the tribe. And I'll let Russ talk for a little bit, and I'll come back to some of my thoughts.
Thank you, Bill. I have to stand up. Thank you. My name is Bill Ogden. My settler name is Russ Hepfer. I'm the vice chair at the Lower Elwha Clallam tribe, which in our language means strong people. And in a few minutes, you'll know why. I want to thank Grand Ronde. Thank you for your excellent hosting. I assume and know that it'll continue throughout the week. So thank you. In my tradition, I will let my council and my community know how I've been treated here. So thank you. I want to talk about EPA and GAP. I'm a GAP kid, I guess. I started fishing with the Norwegians in Ballard, Washington when I was 11 years old. This is pre-Bolt. And then the Bolt decision came. And that allowed us to have some form of stewardship. Up until then, we had no say in our fisheries. They'd put us in jail for fishing. We too had 100-pound king salmon. Of course, my tribe are short, we're coastal, but we have pictures of ancestors that had the head of the king salmon on their shoulder, struggling to walk with the tail on the ground. Now the girth must have been a foot, at least 100-pound king salmon. And we lost that. We didn't create that problem. The settlers did. Europeans came and changed the whole system. No stewardship, take. That's kind of how I grew up. I was taking from my resource, our resource, until I was an adult. And I got hired by my tribe for under EPA GAP grant money. And it's a capacity grant, right? Anybody knows about GAP. But that's where I started with water quality. And it was in direct association with Elwha Dam removal. We removed 2 dams on the Elwha River successfully, and where fish are coming back. In fact, they're coming back in enough numbers, harvestable numbers, that we're having our second ceremonial and subsistence fishery this season. It's only 400 fish, but we are back on the river. And it's because of indigenous knowledge that got us there, our stewardship. I've been on my council. Next month, I'll be entering my 26th year, all associated in this time period with EPA. I consider them a partner. I also consider Nixon one of the greatest presidents we had because he started EPA. He started sovereignty for our nations. We started sticking up for ourselves, and I think people were listening. We're still telling our story. Billy Frank Jr. says, tell your story. And that's part of the problem. We have to keep educating all these folks that are rotating in and out of the government agencies. So I am very, very adept at telling my story and telling, especially EPA, how things should be run. Now, if they listen or not, sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But you have to be patient with them because they're the baby government around here. We've been doing it for millennia. Port Angeles is in my territory, and I meet with city council all the time there. They're always changing. We have one tribal member, our sister tribe, that's on the council, first time in history. And I tell them, Elwha tribe's been waiting for you to move, but you've been here a couple 100 years, so I guess we have to work together because you're not going anywhere and we certainly aren't either. And so I got notes down here. So don't hold your breath. So part of the stewardship that I work with the National Tribal Toxics Council. And there's stewardship there. It's scientists from all over the country. And I'm just a boy from the reservation that's been fishing most of my life. And these are scientists like my PhD friend over here. I'm hoping some of it rubs off. But we've been talking to TSCA, the what is TSCA? Toxic Substance Chemical Abuse? Huh? Control Act. I was in wearing my other hat. And because I am a recovering alcoholic and addict, by the way. And I will talk to anybody about that. But that's a different story. So we've been talking to TSCA for a number of years about their human and health assessments. There's over 80,000 known chemicals in commerce. They are assessing, they started out doing 10 a year to review about human health and their assessments with these chemicals. They're up to 20. What a big coup. I don't know how many years 20 and 80,000 is, but it's a long time. But they are, in some chemicals, they are now using how we tribes interact with these substances, these chemicals. We're on the beach, for instance, digging clams. If that beach is contaminated, our kids are on the beach too. Some of them even eating the sand. So we need to keep our eye on that. And it was a big deal where TSCA was using our tribal lifeways and pathways and our stewardship to get there. Hopefully they'll start doing it with more chemicals and all the chemicals. So we have to be patient with our federal partners and state partners, local partners, because we have to be at the table. Sometimes they don't want us there, but we have to be there because our knowledge is far better than what they know. So with the Elwha dams, I've spent the last 26 years on the policy end of removing dams. The easy part, believe it or not, was getting the act of Congress to remove these dams. It literally took an act of Congress. Now, national park, most of our rivers in the national park. I tell them it took an act of Congress to get you to our table. But that was the easy part. The hard part was getting money to do it. It was an unfunded mandate. So we spent the next 20 years looking for money. We've been at this for over 100 years. But it took our stewardship, our indigenous knowledge to use to get them to pony up to not only make it a law to pull the dams out, but to fund it also. It's been a long, hard journey, but we got it done. How much time do I have left? Okay, I wanted to talk about USB Washington Bolt decision. To me, that's when we really started co-managing. We had a say in how things were done. We were trying to harvest our way out of salmon recovery, meaning that if we slowed down fishing, recovery would come quicker. Well, it isn't. We're losing habitat faster than we can restore it. So again, indigenous knowledge and working with the resource. Salmon can't speak for themselves. We have to speak for them, and us tribes and indigenous people have to speak for them. Because if we don't, we won't have a treaty, we won't have cultures, we won't have traditions. So we need to keep speaking for our salmon. Sometimes we have to force the state, our co-managers, into doing the right thing. In our tradition, you know, you can use shame, praise, and other methods to make people do what is right. But we had to sometimes force the state to think about the salmon, not to go out and catch the last one, but to think about 7 generations. My son is the 7th generation from the Point No Point Treaty of 1855. And when we got our treaty rights back, some of us said, oh crap, we gave up 50%. And some of us said, yay, we got 50%, which I'm in that camp, by the way. And I'm working hard to make sure that the next 7 generations have at least what I have. When we got our rights back, salmon were in decline. I started fishing under the Bolt decision, Indian tribal rights. Damn, I'm gonna be Indian rich forever. Didn't happen. Poof, declined. So instead of going from take, I decided I need to give back to that salmon. And that's why I'm here. And I hope that the rest of you folks and others jump in that canoe to help our salmon. I have one more piece of work from my tribe, my council, to your Grand Round Council and community. We are going to celebrate dam removal with a canoe journey hosting at Elwha. We have 110 acres of new beach, but the old beach eroded because of the dams, but we got our land back. And we're gonna host canoe journeys in 2025 and would be honored with your presence. And that is the end. Oh, I forgot. I always end with, we got our damn salmon back. We're damn proud of it. And we're not damned Indians anymore. Thank you.
Why honor us?
Thank you for your good words. Thank you both for your very good words. So to respond on your opening question to us about reflections on Indigenous stewardship, you know, that word we use today, stewardship, when I think about that word, and I think we always, as tribal people, we look to our elders and our ancestors for the right way to live. And what we call stewardship today, living in right relationship with the earth, with the water, with the gifts, as I talked about earlier, living in right relationship, living in balance. It was just called living. There was no other way to live. Any other way to live led to harm. It led to scarcity, could lead to starvation. So living in balance, what we call stewardship today, was just called living. And it was the only way to live. And I think it is the only sane way to live today. So always try to start there. So I have the opportunity, like my friends here and probably most of the folks in this room, to when we're called to do the work we're called to do, on behalf of our tribes, we get various opportunities to do that. And some of them are surprising. I spent much of my career doing environmental policy work on behalf of tribes, mostly from Oregon, some from Washington, had opportunities to work with the Environmental Protection Agency at the state and national level, had opportunities to work with the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality, the Washington Department of Ecology. And shortly after I was elected to tribal council, told that, I should do that work for a while. I was very surprised to be asked to serve on the state of Oregon's Environmental Quality Commission. So this is a governor-appointed board in the state of Oregon that oversees the work of and is a regulatory decision maker for and a policy-setting body for the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality. 5 Oregon citizens are appointed by the governor to do this work with the Department of Environmental Quality. I want to recognize my partner and my friend, Director Leah Feldon. Leah, could you please wave? Who's here today? I thank you, Leah, for being with us. But after being in some kind of awkward positions before the Environmental Quality Commission for the state of Oregon in the past on behalf of tribes, having some tough conversations, ones that were not always appreciated, I think everything comes full circle, right? So it was my turn to sit on the other side of the table and to have a different role in helping the Department of Environmental Quality decide what the focus of their work should be and where we should be looking, and to try to do that in a new and different way. I really appreciate our state and federal partners who are here today, or even local governments, folks who come to this work from other jurisdictions and responsibilities, because it takes that, right? There are no real or lasting solutions without us working together. Our rivers have never observed the imaginary lines that we like to draw on maps. Our fish don't, the air certainly doesn't, and neither do our people. We come and go throughout our ceded lands, despite the fact that they put us in certain places and expected us to stay there. So partnership is going to be essential. I can't help reflect too on just, the stories that we heard from our friends from Alaska about how our people watch the world, watch our rivers, watch our beaches, watch our fish, and see the change. And it is extremely alarming. And it prompts us to do things differently, both in the work we do with others, but in our own personal lives, to change the work that we do. Because from a tribal perspective, these changes are dramatic. They are life and tribe changing. To see the changes in the fish that's been described already from Alaska, from Washington, that we see throughout all our lands, to our people, they are drastic and concerning. And it's often an interesting challenge when we try to work with folks for whom these frames of reference, our fish, whether or not the beach is where it used to be, is not a frame of reference. We have to do that education. Say the fish are half the size they once were. The fish are 3% of the numbers they once were. But the dominant society we work with, this is often news. They're not sure if it's true. Where did the numbers come from? What was, the statistical deviation on those stats? We'll have to go over that to find out if that's real. And so therefore the sense of urgency is often far removed, and I find it hard to communicate. I find it hard to communicate when I'm in my tribal council role. I find it hard to communicate on the Environmental Quality Commission. I find it hard to communicate with the federal leaders who I meet with and who I say, we don't have another 10, 15, 20 years to allow young salmon through this dam without going through the turbines. We don't have that time. The time has run out. The time for stalling and wasting is already gone because the numbers are now such that if we don't change our behavior in the very near future, the population will be so low that there can't be recovery. And I know that that's something you struggle with. The issue you might be working on might be something different. It might be, air emissions. It might be the way that the pollutants travel through the air and the water. They don't stay in one place. So that's one of the things that I'm thinking a lot about these days as I'm working with the people I am, is that when our Indigenous stewards step forward and they're trying to communicate that we're in huge trouble, we're in desperate trouble, we need your help, not in 10 years, that there's that sense of urgency that's very often difficult to communicate, and I think is viewed with suspicion. Right. I also have to admit that my own educational background is from the field of science. I was educated in the field of biology, and so that kind of that kind of prejudice and way of looking at the world appeals to me because it was my academic training. Right. I love a good graph, man. I love nothing better than a good graph. But the graph doesn't communicate the sense of urgency. It can't communicate that when I talk to my elders about when they caught fish in Agency Creek, what it was like and what it's like today, and that they're afraid that from the change they've seen in their lifetime, they're worried that their great-grandchildren may not have any fish to catch in Agency Creek. Here in Agency Creek, we are helped. I see one member of our natural resources staff here. Please raise your hand. We have the most amazing team at Natural Resources. I'm so proud of them. And they've been, monitoring our returns to our reservation for a long time. And we were seeing some desperate numbers. We were seeing 6 fish return, 4 fish return. It's hard to communicate when you go to a workshop with 12 different agencies and people who they've flown in from other places to put up some graphs and some charts and to say, and again, my affinity for those charts in another context, but to say, wait, I've got to tell you about my uncle's story. My uncle caught fish all the time, and now there's 4 fish that returned last year to Agency Creek. I can't put that on your chart. I need your help. We got to change the way we're doing these things now. So when I think about the challenges before our Indigenous stewards and our state stewards and our federal stewards and our local stewards, the challenge I see is one of urgency. When we're cut and we're bleeding, or a child is, or our elder is, it's urgent. We don't have to convince everybody. We do something right now. And we don't present them a chart about their blood pressure for the last 12 years. And I think that's where we are today. We need to embrace the urgency. We need to demand action sooner rather than later. And we need to reach out and be willing to work with partners we haven't worked with before. So those are the thoughts I bring to our conversation. Masi.
Koyana, we're going to go next with Bill. Then I'll give a little bit of a summary, and I'll give you the opportunity to ask each other any questions you have.
Thanks. I just wanted to kind of gather my thoughts. I was born in 1971, and those of you that aren't familiar with Alaska, that was the year that the ANSCA law was put into place. So I am an ANSCA child that grew up in a system. So stewardship for me has been very checkerboarded. Like Heather had shown on that graph, I grew up along one of those checkerboards, and that was intentionally done because through Indian law, you cannot have authority over ground that's not congruent. So they purposely checkerboarded Alaska so the tribes would never have authority over the land. And many other things through the ANSCA law have taken away from the sovereignty and the ability to be indigenous for Alaskan people. So that's a whole nother topic, but it brings me to stewardship. I started out working for my tribe, and then working for an Angska corporation in their land department, and realized after a few years that the state chartered corporations in Alaska have a different picture in their mind of stewardship than the tribal governments do. And I'm not going to say good or bad, because Angska is the playing field that I was born with, and that's how we operate. Until that law is changed, that's the field we have to play on. But it's been very tough to be stewards of land we don't own. And it's been tough to be indigenous stewards when your indigenous identity has been stripped away. So that's kind of where. Angska was the law that the U.S. government and the oil executives from around the world came to Alaska and kind of wined and dined our elders, bought them all fancy suits, took them down to Washington, D.C. and said, we're not going to give you treaties in Alaska. We're going to give you the Angska law. So Angska is the Alaska Native Land Settlement Act. I just said Angska my whole life, so I always forget what it stood for. But that, so we never had an opportunity to have treaties. We fell right into the trust responsibility. And most of the duties of fulfilling those responsibilities in Alaska have fallen under the state. And the state, until last year, didn't even recognize the existence of tribes. So it was, we had an entity that didn't recognize us doing all the hard work to supply the responsibilities of a federal government. So it's like a minefield to navigate through in Alaska. But the big picture is our streams are changing, our land's eroding, our animals are dying off. I talked about the Copper River. Every year, there's millions of Copper River red salmon that are taken out of the ocean before the Atna people ever see it. In the 80s, we used these Norwegian fish wheels that came up in the 50s to the Yukon River, and then sometime in the 50s, they came down to the Copper River. But we had inherited a fish spot there, and we would sometimes get 3,000 red salmon a day through our fish wheel, more than you could ever process. And this was in the 80s up until the mid 80s. Now our people celebrate when they get 5 salmon a week through their fish wheel. So in just my lifetime, since the 80s, we've watched that decline of the salmon in my region. So I've talked at different engagements about the identity of that salmon and what it's done with the people. So it's a tough subject, because when you lose your indigenous land and your rights and your foods, you lose who you are. And so that gets into another topic of trying to identify who you are after that. But thank you.
Okay, now. Yeah, the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act, it actually removed all tribal land from tribes except for the Metlakatla Reservation. So most of the 229 federally recognized tribes in Alaska are landless, and their jurisdiction is considered to be over their members, but not on any lands. There's no land to manage. And when land is held in corporations, they're held to the Alaska Corporation Code, which is monetary benefits to your shareholders. And the efforts to introduce the aspect of cultural continuity and subsistence as also a benefit to Native shareholders is still an ongoing process. Thank you. I just wanted to kind of draw attention to some of the points that were mentioned and reflect on them briefly. When Russ was talking about salmon, I just want to reflect on something that I was taught at a conference from a guy from the International Monetary Fund. So I was pretty skeptical when he started talking. But he's been partnering with the Maori in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And so he was trying to explain to us the value of a live whale. So there's a problem if a boat hits a whale, the whale dies. That's a fine. But what is the value of a live whale when Maori people see a whale as an ancestor to some of their sub-clan peoples? And so extending that to Alaska, what is the value of a salmon? or to the Pacific Northwest, what is the value of a salmon? Well, commercially, it's probably like $1 a pound. I think if you're a commercial fisherman, if you're buying it from the store, it's usually $15 or $16 a pound. And if you buy at a restaurant, you get a tiny piece for about $30. But for us, we want to know the value of a live salmon. And, nobody puts financial value on that. I'm going to talk about that a little later, but I just want everybody to think about valuing something that's alive. What Kathleen mentioned about balance being life, and that there's often not words in Indigenous languages for things like subsistence, or management. The best translations in English are often balance or nurturance, you heard me use, which often don't quite translate easily for people who work in the regulation space. But these stories, I hope, are really helping communicate what that means. And then drawing attention to the fact of needing to educate in that urgency, where do we see continuity of staff in our regions and communities? In Alaska specifically, there's a special benefit that goes to federal staff who go up there for a certain number of years. It raises their wage before they retire, and then they can retire elsewhere. So it's a really common thing we see in U.S. Fish and Wildlife and U.S. Forest Service when that happens, and it makes it so difficult to have continuity, and to also have people who actually took the time to learn about Alaska before showing up. So communicating that urgency is just, extremely difficult. And getting people to sit down and listen to the stories, and as many tribal communities might not present you with a graph, is also really difficult. So thank you all. And I hope I reflected some of what you said. But I want to give you the opportunity. We have about 10 minutes left, and I wanted to give you the opportunity to possibly ask each other anything that you might want. You have a question? Go for it.
Thank you. I was thinking my tribe has a first salmon ceremony and it's always a king salmon, the most revered, good tasting fat fish, and the first one to come in. We don't have spring salmon anymore, but early summer. And so we honor the salmon and treat it with respect, so it'll go back to its tribe and tell them how it was treated. But there's a local tribe in the Salish Sea that has a first salmon ceremony, but they have to buy their salmon from a neighboring tribe to perform this sacred ceremony. And sometimes at my tribe, we have to go to a neighboring tribe to buy fish for a celebration because we don't have it. And I was wondering how Grand Ronde deals with that, because I heard you say 4 salmon in the agency creek. And that bothers me. We need to help each other. And because if we don't have salmon, we are not Indian people. It's part of our heart, part of our soul, how we live, our cultures and traditions. And so that really struck me. Thank you.
Oh, hi, Masi, Ross. And we have many sources from different places. So while I appreciate, I know, I feel it, I know that hurt the hearts of a lot of people in this room to think 4, right? So thank you for that compassion and understanding. So we don't only get fish from agency, but we do the same. We end up at times buying and getting salmon from other places as well. And we do something else remarkable. When our people go, and they're going to be going next week to fish at Willamette Falls, which is tremendously important cultural restoration for us. Earlier today, I spoke about all the places from which our tribes were removed and brought here to Grand Ronde. And one of those very important places is a place called Tumwata that is now called Willamette Falls. It's this amazing jewel of a geographic feature, the second largest waterfall by volume in North America that most people who living in Oregon have never seen. It's really hard to get a good look at the place, but it's absolutely amazing. And we're working on that. So we'll let you know when we can help get you all down there. But when our people go there, we restored our fisheries there very much in active and open partnership with the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. I appreciated your comment earlier about our neighbors aren't going anywhere, so we're going to learn to work with them. And we've had the exact same perspective. But at the time, you know, that's harvesting Willamette salmon that I told you about, and I told you were in such dire condition. So when we made that agreement, we voluntarily, from the very start, said, in any year, we will take no more than 15 fish. And we have about 6,000 tribal members, right? So that's going to be pretty hard to get around. But the importance of the fishing, it was infinitely more important to live in the ways, to fish in the ways and the place of our ancestors. That's right, the importance of the right relationship. If our river cannot afford to give us more fish, then for us, for now, the right thing to be in right relationship is not ask it to say we are so thankful for whatever fish you choose to give us. And there have been years when the answer was no fish from the falls this year. And you know what? We say, we understand, we will work harder. We'll work harder to make this better. This year you couldn't give us fish, and we're so sorry. We're so sorry that you couldn't do that this year. We know that in our relationship that the river would never choose that. But maybe every single fish that year, maybe every single fish was needed to go upstream. And if so, then that's very important that they do. And it's very important that we be grateful that they're on that journey, right? That's how we'll get more salmon. So we are facing some very difficult and, you know, strange things, something like that. But it was just as important for us to show our gratitude that year as every other year, right? Because that's about the right relationship. And if we live in those ways, and I believe it's only if we live in those ways, do we have a hope of getting to the place where then again, the following year, the salmon gave us the 15 salmon. And we said, that's enough. 15, we won't take another fish. Thank you for this gift. We hope and we work darn hard. So the day will come where 15 salmon is not something we talk about anymore. But for now we're grateful for 15 fish, tremendously grateful. I thank you for that. I guess if there's one other last thought, it is, I want you to know, all you people in this room here today, that you're working very hard. And very often you don't get told thank you. Very often you're coming into rooms where the message that you have to bring is not necessarily welcome or necessarily appreciated. And you know what? I say that not just to the tribal workers in this room, to the federal workers in this room, to the state workers in this room. I know my friend Leah Feldon goes into rooms where she has to say hard things people don't want to hear either. I want to be a person here who, on behalf of my tribe and many others, thanks you for that work, because you don't get thanked very often. Please know that we appreciate you and your voices are needed, and that you are the champion for the salmon, the air, the water that can't speak for itself. So that's what I want to leave you with, is that hayumasi.
I'll be quick with, I see the 3 minutes. I want to just briefly add, I see things underneath I'll switch hats. I know we're not supposed to wear our hats, but to a tribal administrator hat, you know what, growing up, 30% of our people supplied the meat and the fish for the rest of the community, the hunters, and I was in the hunter family. So we provided the moose for everybody else in the village and the neighboring villages. And as competition for that game, my people are on the road system of Alaska. So the 3,000 Natna people in my region are competing against 50 to 100,000 outside hunters that are coming into our region for the same game. So last year I was able to pass out one moose among 500 people. And last week I gave out 300 doses of Narcan.
Well, thank you. Thank you all. This was very moving stories that you shared with us. And I hope everybody feels that and understands that that we miss our relatives, our non-human kin, our more than human kin, in the same way as we miss our human kin. If the salmon story was hard to understand, maybe think about during COVID, how you couldn't see your family members, how some of your family members were passing, and how painful that was. We feel that same exact pain of our salmon family, of the moose family, and how we miss those that have been lost. And we try to do better, create a healthy space, create a safe environment for them to come back. So I just want to thank everybody for the wisdom that they've shared, and I hope that we were all able to soak it in. Transitioning, which is an abrupt one right now because that was heavy, but I'm going to transition. And the next step is going to be a word cloud, which you will all participate in. You will see this link, I think, on the screen for Menti. I don't know if you've ever used Menti before. It's like a poll. You can do it on your phone or your computer, and you enter the menti.com, and then it's the link, I think. Oh, or you can just do that telephone scan of that. And our question, based on what everybody shared today and how it made you feel, the question is asking, what words do you associate with Indigenous stewardship of Mother Earth? So you can do like a single word and it'll pop up, and you'll find if you reflect a word that's already up there, that word will get bigger and bigger. So the biggest words we know are ones that people have said multiple times. But yeah, please take your inspiration from the panel. And otherwise, I'm going to thank the panel to return to their seats, and we are going to transition to Kenneth Martin as the next session lead for the Foundations of Federal and State Stewardship. But take a few minutes, please, to add to the word cloud. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Okay, up with Kenneth will be Casey Sixkiller, Leah Felden, Tyson Hawk Ferrero. Yes. And if you want, I know we didn't last time, but if you want to create kind of more of a conversational C shape, you are welcome. Microphones are always on, right?
I am going to move a little bit more.
Yes, go ahead, go ahead.
Sorry, I'm going to try to make these a little bit more fireside chat and in the light. Watch me fall off the stage. Put the state in the middle. State in the middle. Hot seat.